Today's guest is Tarrazzia Martin. She is a senior advisor for enterprise technology planning and change management at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and she's the executive director of USNIA Global Law Enforcement Investigative Services. And I'm so looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me, Tarrazzia.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Jeremy.
So for those who haven't met you, or even myself, have not heard all about your background, share with us where you're from, who you are, and what you do.
Sure. So Tarrazzia Martin was born in a small town in Utah called Ogden, and started my journey there. My family relocated there from different places. My great grandmother, who and grandfather actually relocated to Utah because of the Union Pacific Railroad. As African Americans, coming from other parts of the U.S. As part of that business, right? I could get a job on the railroad, and my grandfather was a chef on the railroad when they actually cooked dinner,
Oh,
as
wow.
opposed to pre-made meals now. And my grandmother was one of the first African American business owners in Ogden, Utah, which is a very largely LDS community, and not very diverse at that time, I would say. Anyway, she started her first business, and my aunt Annabelle started a business right next to hers. My grandmother's business was a hair salon, and my aunt's business was a restaurant that sold tacos and fried chicken. And there was a whole combination of things going on there because of the diversity of the Hispanic community and the Black community sort of coming together to support each other during that time. And so the evolution began, right? So business owners in a time that wasn't really welcoming them, as minority women, but they were triumphant in their quest. And there were a lot of minorities coming through on the train, and they didn't have a place to get services because of the
Mm.
segregation issues and other things. And they made a home for them. They made it a comfort path through for them. And we call them the passageway women, right? Because they gave people
Yeah.
some safety and places where they could feel comfortable. But anyway, that's how we ended up in Utah of all places. And then I was, of course, born there with my siblings, and went to elementary school and all the things, and uh, you know, just the evolution of my growth. And so anyway, that's kind of where it all began.
From that point, as you were graduating high school, how did you know what you wanted to do with your life? I mean, you had this background with your family, certainly in business. Did you have a plan to go there, or were you more outwardly focused?
So it's interesting. My goal was to do something in the civic world. My grandmother was very civic oriented. I give her a lot of credit. So you'll hear me talk much about her because I think mentorship and learning from others is part of everyone's journey. But when you take it to heat, it can change your life. And so I wanted to be civic oriented. We were big members of what they used to call Toastmasters, and I think
Yeah.
they still have it. But I remember at 8 years old, she threw me out there and said, "Okay, you have to give a talk on this thing," and all of that happened. And so it made me think, okay, I want to do more in the community. I want to be more involved in working with people, helping others, even at a young age. And I started my first business at 15.
Oh, wow.
I was cleaning houses, and just started doing that for neighbors so that, revenue generation. I was already thinking about it, already there. But underlying all of that, not just making a few dollars, was just trying to help others, like elderly and folks like that. So with that in mind, high school happened. That was on my mind. I said, okay, I want to go, of course, to college. It would have been one of the first in my family actually to go. And so I chose to go to Utah State University, which is in another small community in Utah called Logan, Utah, and focused on broadcast communication and journalism, and with a minor in business. And so that was my foray. And I just took that and wanted to be Oprah when I grew up, all the things, because she was just coming out, a few years around that time, but never made that goal. And so communication and journalism allowed me to, of course, learn the writing skills and do all the things required to communicate, which are so essential for all of us. And so that began. And that's, college happened. I won't talk about it, Jeremy, because you don't want to know about college days. It was a tough time. We didn't have a lot of money. There was just a lot of things, but it was a great experience. And then after that, I said, you know what? Let me try to find a job. And I ended up taking a role as a counselor in a boys' home, a Hispanic boys' home of troubled youth. That was my first gig, and ended up, it was called Esperanza para Mañana. And my journey there was just to learn more about my Latino history and culture, but also to help these young boys who were wayward and needed some guidance, all that kind of thing. So that was the first job. Didn't pay well, but it was great, a great experience. And then I ended up applying for a job with the IRS and in Utah, which is one of their largest service centers in the area in the country. And so I started there as a grade two,
Wow.
uh, in the mailroom of all places.
That's funny because you hear about people that classic trope of, okay, you started in the mailroom, you start at the bottom,
Right.
and you actually did that. That's amazing.
I sure did, sorting mail. It was really awesome, and working the afternoon night shift. But then, of course, I moved quickly. You know, there's a story that I wrote a few years ago, and it was called "From the Mailroom to the Boardroom," because that's exactly what the journey has been. But yeah, so I started there as a grade two, and then just continued to kind of go up the chain. I made a commitment to myself that I was going to be an executive in 10 years, because I knew I didn't want to be a grade two in the mailroom, and I was very driven to do that. And so it seems that the universe and God took care of me, because every journey step allowed me to move up, and did some sideway moves, of course, as we all do on the path, but all of them have led me to quite a successful government career 40 years later. So 40 years in right now.
Wow. And then you stayed with government until, I'm assuming, all the way till now. So you said 40 years. What brought you into the DC area then?
So the IRS did, after working there and realizing that there was only so much you could do in the service center environment, and I'd made that commitment to myself to become to get an SES. That was the term we always used. I want to be an SES. Everyone wanted that, aspired to be that. And then I had several mentors at the IRS from that kind of helped steer me. And I came here to DC on a vacation with two of my girlfriends, and fell in love with, I just came up that escalator on the mall down in DC where you see everything. I was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. I went back home after that vacation and started applying for jobs. I applied for like 10 jobs, got hired for three, and did the Carnac thing and said, okay, which one do I pick? And I picked the one with the IRS, and then relocated here, and that's when my career began with the DC area. But since that time, I've worked for 8 different agencies on top of that, and have kind of moved around in terms of my journey. To me, a learning experience, like I think you and I talked about this, your significant other also thinks about the sort of 2-year jaunt mentality. That was really in my head. Never stay on a job. Once you master it, move on to something else, to learn something new, but to also expand your horizons. And I really found that even though I wasn't, consciously thinking about it, that's what I ended up doing.
Hmm.
Just kind of moved and, moved to a different project, or learned some new technology, or, expanded into a new area of thinking. And during this 40-year jaunt, IRS, I was elevated to the Department of Treasury after that, and ended up running their infrastructure. And that was pre 9/11, so it was pre DHS.
Hmm.
And then, ended up going to GSA and helping them set up what we now call USA.gov. Was one of the leaders there, working on firstgov.gov, which was what it was called originally, and really building out that sort of search engine model and the architecture of how all the agencies would feed their data in, and what it would look like. And now look at it, right, Jeremy? I mean,
Yeah.
it's all information now, and it's everywhere. But then it was figuring out how to architect such a thing. So anyway, GSA, and then from there I went to Homeland, and was one of the first employees there after just before 9/11. And then after that, was the deputy director for infrastructure at Homeland, as we stood up all those agencies and built that infrastructure for them, all on the network side, data center side, et cetera. And then became the CIO for USCIS, our immigration organization, which had previously been INS. And it was sort of a modernized view of the soft side of immigration, not the enforcement side. And that was just a beautiful experience, I got to tell you. Not just because I was in the CIO role shaping something that had never been done, which was also exciting, but the ability to see how we help immigrants and those that come into our country, and what the process is for adoption and learning and becoming a citizen, and being part of the whole process to be part of the American dream. I can't even put in words the amazing work that they do. And then, of course, after that, I ended up going over to the intelligence community and worked there for a very long time. Did some amazing things, just amazing things that we'll talk about another time. But it was fabulous there as well. And then HUD was begging me to come over, literally some of the leaders to come over and help them modernize and transform their organization. And as it relates to antiquated technology, legacy systems, data centers, the whole thing. And after a few years of that prodding and poking, they said, "Oh, please come, come, come." So I did. And so I've been with HUD since then. And in between, there are a few other things, but those are the highlights.
Well, I think you illustrate something that I love. I'm on my fifth federal agency, and before that, I did contracting for quite a while and worked for a number of DoD organizations. And that moving around gives you such, as an IT professional, right? We have that ease to move between missions, but to get into a place and understand the mission, buy into the mission, and understand how it serves the American public, I love that. I absolutely love that about government service.
Me too. Me too. And that we have the ability to do so. And that, when I was coming up, it was always, oh, this agency, everything was vertical, really very, very, very vertical. The resources were vertical, the programs were vertical. But now, because of the nature of where we are as a world and as a country, we're seeing more horizontal services where, we can take our skills and apply it to other agencies or look for opportunities where we're doing the same kind of work and synergize that work in terms of resources and planning. So yeah, I think we're in a great place now for that kind of cross-cultural, cross-agency learning and integration. So yeah, kudos to you on that.
So, what is USNIA Global Law Enforcement Investigation Services?
So USNIA is a law enforcement agency that offers security guard and investigative services, private policing, loss prevention, kind of work for customers that need it. Our clientele has been commercial, retail, private needs like private policing, executive protection, those kinds of services that are all in the realm of law enforcement. And that organization has been in existence just about 10 years, and ventured into that business because a lot of what we were seeing around the country were minorities being, really attacked by law enforcement for undue reasons. And, we see, brown people, Black people, white people, green people, all people just somehow being I want to say disrespected by law enforcement, where it wasn't really clear where that synergy ought to be.
Hmm.
They were like on opposite poles. And we saw a lot of minorities, brown and Black people being killed for minor infractions and a lot of misinformation and just really kind of faulty thinking. So our goal was, when you looked around the country, what can we do to help mitigate that? Thinking of Rodney King and some of these other people. And so we said, let's create this thing, or let's take this thing and see if we can bridge the gap between community policing and law enforcement. So, sort of an education forum, but really a way where the community can understand why law enforcement does what it does, and the law enforcement entities can understand what communities are
Hmm.
culturally, legacy wise, all the things that make up small communities in our country from different countries, different nationalities, different ethnic groups. So we wanted to be that bridge of education. And so we started going into some of these communities and recruiting, young people who may not have even thought about becoming a law enforcement person, and then bringing them in and training them, helping them understand, what opportunities there are to kind of come in as an unarmed officer, get your armed license, then learn how to do defensive tactics. One day, maybe you could work for the GSA or the federal government as a FSA officer, or maybe you could go to Secret Service, or maybe FBI, or maybe, but giving them a career trajectory, right? But also ensuring that they understand law enforcement principles and practices so they can teach another one, right? They're not all here to hurt us, but let's talk about training.
Hmm.
So what we learned, and I know this is maybe a long-winded answer, but what we did as well is we set up this training capability so that we could begin to train people about what true law enforcement skills are, how to use a handgun, how to use aspeton, how to use handcuffs, and why. What does non-lethal force mean? What does lethal force mean? So this whole training thing has really blossomed, and we're seeing a lot of people who are just so they may never have had that opportunity, right? Or even thought about it. So
Yeah.
we think we're making a difference in that regard. Much work to do. But what we learned, Jeremy, very precisely is that the training manuals and some of the training curricula that law enforcement uses is really, really antiquated. I mean, really antiquated, back to slavery days antiquated, in some
Hmm.
cases. And so it's helping them see too that there's some adjustments. What is emotional quotient? Why should you be thinking, from an emotional intelligence perspective versus, hey, lethal, lethal, lethal. And so there's a lot of work there, but that's the void we're trying to fill with USNIA and our approach to education on law enforcement.
I absolutely love that. That entire concept is amazing. I don't talk about this very often, but my career started in law enforcement in the military. I was a police officer before I got married for quite a few years until I got married, and my wife was like, I don't know that we should continue that path. And that's when I kind of said, okay, well, then I'll go into information technology.
Understand?
But I love that. I love that. And I also have a friend who has a business, and his business is helping other countries set up quality law enforcement
Wow.
programs that do something similar, right? About how do they engage? How do you engage the communities you work in? How do you deal with the bureaucracy of politicians above you, and all those sorts of things that are challenging when you're trying to put in place a program like that. So I absolutely love that, and can see, across the United States, you see it all the time. If you go on YouTube and you watch YouTube shorts, there's all kinds of lawyers talking about, the horrible situations you get yourself in with law enforcement, and how law enforcement crosses the line in many ways. And so that educational component, I love it. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a labor of love for sure. Ups and downs, right? Because of, just the way things are, but it's good. It's been good. And we get success stories all the time. And I'll tell you, we failed a lot, because just like with any small business, you learn along the way. And as long as you learn fast and then keep it moving or evolve your journey, it seems to work out. But thank you for asking about that. That's a near and dear piece of my life. So thanks.
So Tarazia, when you look kind of back over your career, what's something, or more than something if you have it, that you go, man, I wish we did that differently. I wish there's some opportunity there, that if the right time and energy and people came together, this process could be improved or made more efficient for those who are coming behind us, or even for those in the environment today. And I'll caveat that to say we don't have to figure out how to gain those efficiencies today. We just talk about the area that could use some change. And what does that look like for you?
Well, that's a great question. When I look back on my career and I think, what could I do differently? It took me many years to realize that, this is all about bringing the next one up, right? Because you get so focused, and we're trained this way all the way from the time we're young pups, right? Okay, focus on you, and you got to do this, and you, me. Even in our jobs, you're individual contributor for so many years, and then all of a sudden they say, we want to make you a manager, you want to make you a team leader, and then you're like, oh, I got to work with other people. How do I do that without, just focusing on what I know I can do? That leadership, tipping point. And it's the same thing, in my own personal growth, is that realizing, that really we are here for each other. And if there's something I understand that others may not, or there's something they understand that I may not, or something they can help me with, how do we get to that collaborative, always collaborative model? Because that's how we win. And I see it all the time in our government experience, where we just elevate people because they're really, really great, but then they're the worst like leaders
Yeah.
ever. They don't know how to work with other people because all they see is their me model, right? I'm the contributor, I'm the smartest, I'm the whatever. And I think, of the lessons, one of the biggest lessons is really stepping back and realizing that you're just a small part of this bigger story. And I'm very spiritual, and I think part of that spiritual awakening is realizing that we are all one. And if we can just sort of realize that everyone brings something, and if we can be sort of that, I'm going to call it the navigator or the centerpiece to kind of spread the love, and then it'll come back to you, right? And it comes with knowledge sharing as well, not just activities, but sharing the wealth, letting people know what's going on, helping them have a better life experience. Man, that's utopia right there. That is it. That is it. So that's one of my big life lessons that I tell my mentees now. really step back and realize you've got gifts that God's given you, and how do you share those? And it'll just manifest goodness all around you.
Mm.
That makes sense, Jeremy.
It totally does. I mean, I would say in my experience, I'll use government as a class, but this is not a problem that's isolated to government, right? Every organization who does what you're saying, who has rock star leader people who are producing, and then you're like, oh, great, that means you could get a team to produce, right? Not just you to produce, so we get economies of scale. And then they fail the first few times or all the times because they don't receive the training. And I think there was only one agency I even worked for that had a really, really solid like leadership training where they would send you away to like a course or an experience or a leadership program. But otherwise, most do not. They have maybe, some online courses that you can take to try to understand some, here's how to communicate as a leader or whatever. And some of that I think is we seem to be stuck in a journey over the last, I would say 5 to 10 years, where we just never seem to have enough time.
Yeah.
And so our programs are focused on how quickly can we get you the information, not how well and or what the quality of that information is.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And so one of the things I think government is evolving to with this whole work from home opportunity we have now is that they're realizing that the way we've been, and I'm not speaking for any agency, but just my observation is that we're realizing that we're not commodities. People are
Yeah.
not commodities. Before it was like, okay, come to work. It was that old, I don't even remember the movie, come to work and you do your thing and you sit at your computer and then you take your lunch at 30 minutes and all that stuff. And what I think we've realized is that that's not the most productive model. And I think the pandemic, if it taught us anything, it taught us that. And I think now what we're seeing is we're giving people freedom to work from home. But what it's also done is also sort of created more separation in terms of the teaming arrangements. So Zoom is a great tool, right? But that intimacy of collaboration it's a different model now. It's a
Yeah.
different model. And I think the challenge for leadership now is to figure out, okay, how do we take this operating model and bring in some sort of unified teaming structure, even though it's remote? I think that's a
Mhm.
huge challenge. I don't know if you're seeing that, Jeremy, but I think it's a tremendous opportunity for us to think about how to leverage technology, but keep that intimacy of team and collaboration. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I'm interviewing you now. What do
Yeah,
you think?
yeah. No, I love it. I agree completely. I mean, I manage a team and how do you do that remotely? And some of that is taking advantage. My agency, not to speak for my agency has this concept of when you come into that building, which you do on a periodic basis, right? We mostly telework, make it meaningful. Look for meaningful interactions. So for instance, I don't schedule meetings on that day. That day is about human interaction. Walk around the building, see who's here, have conversations. I've been fortunate, not all the time, but most of the time to have majority of my team in the building on that day, or at least every other week. We somehow all meet up or something, and we can have focused, meaningful conversation, or just that. Building a team is more than just doing the work, right? It's getting to know each other, understanding strengths and weaknesses, what are going on in your life at home, and how does that play out in how you relate to people in the office. And so and then as you said, over COVID, learning how to do that in a remote fashion. Like I have open office hours every Friday for an hour, and we just hang out and we'll talk about a variety of topics. It may be personal topics like what are you doing this weekend, and it may be, hey, there's this thing that came up this week, let's talk through it, and whoever's on the call can provide an opinion whether you're involved or not.
Right.
And I think more of those kind of opportunities will help. I mean, many years ago, I worked in a remote team when I worked as a contractor consultant in the commercial world, and we had a remote team doing work for a Wall Street entity, and we hung out in a chat room while we worked. And so that we could quickly, like, it was the equivalent of turning in the cubicle and saying to somebody
Okay.
next to you, hey, how do you do that? I'm trying to
Right.
figure it out. And so we would have this open chat room because it was before we had this wonderful technology now where you could just be in a call, right, with
Right.
video. And we would just quickly chat to one another, and then you could paste back, hey, here's a little bit of an answer to how to do that, right? And we need to do more things like that, I think, where we have these interactive, just hangout calls so that you can have some of that, gain back some of that interaction you would get being one-on-one.
Yeah, absolutely. See, so we were all kind of setting the stage for now, right? All those
Yes.
experiences, right? Yeah, it's been a journey, you know. So I work remotely all the time, but I went into the office for a big meeting a few days ago, and it had been many years, like over three. Uh, so going in was just quite an experience. It's so desolate, right, in the
Yeah.
city, and just it's just very interesting. But when I did go in, just a short story, when people started seeing one another, oh, I haven't seen you in X, you know, all the things, right?
Yeah.
And but just the energy around that was so refreshing. And we forget that when we're working in isolation, even though I get to see you on screen, you forget that human element. And that's the part I think we've got to figure out what that recipe is. What's that recipe to continue to keep that, you know, humanistic sort of thing that we somehow are missing as part of this remote work experience. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't think we'll fix it all today or have the best ideas today, but hopefully we've inspired some people to think about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what's coming up for you here in the near future? Anything going on?
Wow, let's see. I don't know, 40 years in, let me think, huh? I'm not sure. I'm doing a wonderful, I'm working on a wonderful project at HUD right now, which is the Zero Trust Architecture Strategy for protecting our systems data against our enemies. And so it's a lot of really great work, a great experience. We've got people from all walks, you know, every part of the organization engaged, and it's been a lot of fun. So it's got my interest peaked right now. And so, you know, keeping up the good work there and really helping the American people, that's a big part of it. Also, just, you know, keeping the businesses going. I also have a small nonprofit called New Utopia, which is focused on addressing those without homes.
Hmm.
And so, you know, between the hours of 2 and 4 in the morning, because sleep is not an option, I think someone said last week. Um, I'm really just trying to get that launched and really help the homeless situation here in Virginia is pretty. It's growing in pockets. We have people living in the tent cities, in the woods, in lots of pockets in Virginia, and it's figuring out what programs and services we can help them with so that their life experience can be better. And so that's a huge part of what's on my radar is figuring out how I can do more civic work, you know, really helping people who really need it out there in the communities that depend on us, you know, that depend on us. So that's my next big jaunt, I think, Jeremy.
Wow, it sounds like a very important one, and so I can't wait to see how that pans out for you. Tarrazzia, I thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. You're just a joyful person, and it's great to interact with you, and your energy is infectious. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bless you, Jeremy. Appreciate you.